Welcome back to the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scaleups, and Early Stage Businesses, with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me. And today, in this episode, we're going to wrap up our overview of the Destination Employer methodology. We're going to do that by talking about the last of the three phases, the retention phase. Now, last week we looked at recruitment. The week before that, we looked at attraction. Today we talk about retention. Now, just like we did in the last 2 weeks, let's start with the four key elements that most directly directly track to the retention phase. Now, as I discussed in the 12 key elements, all of them have impact on all three phases, but four of them track most to retention, and those are new hire orientation, training/career development plans, employee reviews, and exit interviews/alumni groups. Now, when you look at these things, the new hire orientation, much as it sounds, is what happens when your new team member accepts the offer and then joins your firm. New hire orientations are the number one place where most companies drop the ball. Why? Because they treat this as a paperwork event and not as the beginning of an exciting new career for this person. Your orientation is not when that person shows up at your HR office, which these days is done via an email, but when they show up at the HR office and fill out their W-4 and their employment agreement and the other requisite paperwork. That's obviously a part of it, but that's not the important part. The important part in a new hire orientation is making sure that that person starts the journey of feeling heard and valued by taking all the information that we learned up to this point and transitioning that information into their training, career development plans, and their employee reviews. It also is an opportunity for them to meet their manager for the first time as their manager. Now, more often than not, that person was a part of the interview phase. But there's a subtle difference between seeing someone as an interviewer and seeing someone as their manager. So that's an important thing. And that manager steps off on the right foot by sharing back the information they learned during the recruitment phase. More on that to follow in a minute. The next key element is the training and career development plans. What does that mean? This person is only going to be excited by this job as long as they're learning new skills or increasing their responsibilities. And the more that we can map out that journey and tie the metrics for them to get the training that they desire in their career for their career's growth to the outcomes that you require from them as their employer, the more we can do that, the more longevity we can create. Said differently, the more length to the retention. The other piece is the employee review, which we're going to talk in a good bit more detail later. But the employee review is how we as an employer evaluate their performance over a period of time. Now, here's another area where an opportunity is frequently missed. Employee reviews get a lot of flack on places like LinkedIn and in talks with employment experts, and they get it for the right reason. And that reason is that most employee reviews are stale, poorly prepared for, and far too infrequent. An annual employee review, standalone with no supporting reviews, is nearly worthless. Why? The data set is too large. The amount of the period of time covered is too great. There is a very nearly 100% chance that you will succumb to nearness bias if you do that. What I mean by that is this. You will undervalue the events for the first 3 or 4 months of that year, and you'll overvalue the events of the last 3 or 4 months. They are almost worthless. Employee reviews should be frequent for a new employee and gradually spread out as that person shows you through their ability to execute on their role, that they understand their position and the expectations set for them, to a point where it gets to be done quarterly And those quarterly reviews should then feed a larger annual review. That's the way to do that masterfully. So in the beginning, the frequency will be dependent on many factors, and I don't know your company well enough to speak to what would be the best for you, but those factors would be the seniority of the person, the complexity of the role, the amount of time it will take them to fully matriculate into your company's systems, and really, ultimately, I guess, if you were to boil it down, how long it takes that person to be able to execute at your minimum level of expectation consistently. Once that happens, you can start to gap these out a little bit longer. But as I'd mentioned, I would never do it less than quarterly. The last thing is exit interviews / alumni groups. Now, exit interviews are once again something that often has a low opinion in the employment space. Once again, for good reason, because these are done just like new hire orientations with very little planning and without the right mental space. So understand this, please. We are at a point in our country where tenure with an organization is lower than at any other point in U.S. history. We're in a place where employees are thinking about things like quiet quitting and the great resignation and are almost entirely checked out of their jobs. And the reason for that is because we as employers have failed in our job to inspire them to see value in maintaining this relationship. If you're a destination employer believer, you've read the book or gone through the program, or you're working with Redbeard to implement these methodologies in your company, then that's not you. But really, the exit interview should happen, obviously, when that person leaves the organization, but with the mindset that this person is no longer able to grow with our organization. Now, please stay till the end. I have some other final thoughts and strategies to make that as long a period of time as is possible. But the exit interview's purpose is to learn what we could have done better and to make sure we do everything in our power to release this now former employee out to the marketplace as an ally. Now, in a very small percentage of circumstances, the break will be harsh because of something bad, an integrity violation, a legal violation, something like that. But the overwhelming majority of time, these should be pleasant and over time reviewed favorably. That brings up a final 4B / this new concept to consider, and that's alumni groups. I talk about that in other places in a lot more detail. The short version is you want to maintain some level of positive relationship with all of your former employees so that at the least you have someone who's not bad-mouthing you in the marketplace, and at the most you have an active advocate for your organization who will refer candidates to your open roles. Remember, almost no one is going to stay in your organization forever. At the time of this recording, an average technical person stays in their role for a year or two at most, a salesperson for 14 to 18 months. So we, of course, want to be on the longer end of that scale. But even if we double or triple those, you're looking at 3 to 5 years for most folks. If that person leaves your organization because their ability to grow with you has been met and there's no further place for them to grow, that's not an integrity violation. If they can get a substantial pay increase or a dramatic improvement or next level in their career, again, they're not committing a crime against you. They're not sneaking out the back with the family silver. That's a natural ending, and they shouldn't be punished in the exit interview for that. The only thing that it accomplishes is spreading ill will and increasing the likelihood that you get a LinkedIn or Glassdoor review warning people against joining your organization. There's no win for you there. So the exit interview serves those two purposes. Learn what we could have done better and do what we can to send a friend out into the marketplace. Now, beyond the overview of what this phase is, I think I just accomplished that. Here are some tips that you can use right away to help your retention. Now, remember, when I say retention, what I mean is this. Your goal is to keep your quality, best performing employees for as long as you are able to keep them in a highly performance state. Okay, that's the goal here when I talk about retention. It's not keeping the people that aren't succeeding. It's not keeping the people that are dragging your team down. Those folks we need to separate from. A good rule of thumb, and one that I've had an enormous amount of success with over the years, is this. I give every new hire that I have on one of my teams 100% of my support. Everything I can give them until one of three things happens. Number one, they show me through their ability to do their job that they no longer need that level of support, and they earn the autonomy to work independently. That's number one, best case outcome. Number two, they show me that they cannot do the job I hired them for. Or number three, they show me that they will not do the job that I hired them for. In the second and third circumstances, if they're an otherwise strong cultural match for my company, but aren't able to execute on the role I hired them for, and there is another opportunity within the company, another role where they might be able to, I would seriously consider moving them over to that. If they can't, and frankly, rarely will that the stars align in that way, but if they can't, at that point, I immediately terminate. I immediately end. That might sound harsh to you, but I need you to understand a couple important things about retention. Number one, your team will know at least as soon as you do, if not earlier than you, when somebody's not working out. And if you keep them past the point where it's clear that they can't or won't do the job, you are actively harming your team. In addition, you are wasting that person's time. Because if they can't or won't do the job that you hired them for, they're never going to thrive in your organization. And if they're not going to thrive, if they're going to merely survive and drag the team down, you're not helping anyone. You're hurting your team. You're hurting your own time that you could share with other people that could better utilize it. And you're hurting your payroll funds. There's no win there. So as soon as it becomes clear that they can't or won't stay, let them go. That tells the team that you value them, that you'll have the hard conversation and do the hard thing for them, and they will appreciate that. The next thing to keep in mind as we're talking about retention beyond that is that the easiest way to make sure that someone is going to stay with your organization is to understand that retention starts at the beginning. So what does that mean? Retention is the most complex of the phases, in part because it involves maintaining and building a relationship over time. It's very dynamic as people's wants and needs and even their values can and often do change over time. So that's the first part. But when I'm talking about beginning at the beginning, our employer branding needs to show our company's actual culture, like we talked about in the attraction phase, so that when people come aboard, they get what they expected. Again, they get what they expected. If you're seeing people come in and bounce out of your organization in a short period of time, the most common reason is what they got isn't what they were told they would get or what they believed that they would get. So that's often an employer branding problem. So remember, the employer branding starts the retention step. The recruitment phase continues it as we ensure that we're asking questions around what the candidate's trying to accomplish and what they value in the interviews that we have with them in all these interactions. So we start with employer branding. Through the interview process, we're making sure this job is a logical next step for them. We're making sure that our values, our mission, our goals align. We're sharing what the real company culture is. So what they get is what they expect. We're doing all of those things. And then we're going to take all that we've learned in every engagement we've had and use that to build the first key element of retention. What is that again? New hire orientations. So that we can show that new hire, that recently former candidate, that we're listening to what they said, and we want to and that we want to start off on the right foot by showing that back to them think about that for a minute. You're in an interview process as a candidate looking to get this job. And you tell that recruiter or that hiring manager that you're trying to accomplish this thing in your next job, that learning these skills are important to you, and that in this period of time you'd like to be at this place in your career. Now, in your new hire orientation, your manager, who you're meeting for the first time as a manager, looks at you and says, during the interview process, you said you want to do this in this period of time and learn these skills. Let's break down how that happens here. And then you present to them their career and training program. And you talked about how the employee reviews work. And you show the things that they need to accomplish on their end in order to achieve the things that you want. Now all those nebulous, tenuous ideas have an actual timeline with clear steps that they have to do in order to accomplish their goals. They will start the process here of feeling heard and valued. And because you're making real steps with a real timeline attached that you're going to follow up on during the employee review process, it becomes very real for them. And as you actually do that, word becomes deed, and then it becomes real for them. This, what I just described, if this is all that you do, you're gonna crush retention. You're gonna have people lasting in your organization for longer than industry averages because not enough people do this. Now, employee reviews are a really important thing to talk about as it relates to retention. Employee reviews should be done more frequently in the beginning and then gradually extend to longer time frames as that person demonstrates through their execution that they no longer need that same level of supervision. Said differently, they earn their autonomy through their ability to do their job well. So again, there's going to be a lot of variables here. Their seniority level, complexity of the role, the complexity of your internal systems and processes, how hard the projects they work on are, lots of different things. But the thing to remember is, in the beginning, it's better to meet them more often than less often. And the more available your message the more available you make yourself, the clearer you send the message that they are important. Now, probably in the back of your mind somewhere, the specter of micromanagement is coming up. And that's a valid specter, and make sure you kill it dead because nothing's going to hurt your team worse than a micromanager. But an active manager in the beginning is what gives that person the shortest runway to autonomy because they're seeing firsthand how things work. Just demonstrating doesn't work. So if you're teaching them a new skill, you might do it for them the first time and have them watch. The second time you do it together, the X number of times you continue to do it together with that person doing more and more of it themselves. And then the final time they do it and you watch, now you both know they know how to do it. You give them some autonomy. They've shown they can execute. So you give some autonomy, come back. Again, this is intentionally general because it could be lots of different roles. It might be an hour, it might be a day, it might be a week. You give them a period of time to execute on that several times. Then you come and watch them do it again to make sure they've not picked up some bad habits. They've not found a few shortcuts that wind up becoming long cuts in the end. And they're still doing things the right way. And then you give them a greater period of time before you observe again. That's active management without micromanaging. Now, another quick note on employee reviews and annual reviews in particular, they're held in pretty low esteem. The reason why they're held in low esteem is because most managers and leaders fail to align that individual employee's goals and desired outcomes with the company's goals and desired outcomes, and they don't marry them together. The more that you marry them together with clear steps on what that employee needs to do to thrive, the more that they will value those meetings, because it won't feel like they're going to the principal's office. It'll feel like they're going to the guidance counselor's office. They're going to talk about what they need to do to get their goals met. That's a very different feeling than sitting down with the manager and talking about solely corporate goals. Now, annual reviews in particular are held in the lowest of esteem for very good reason. At no point in your employees' development, whether they've been with you for a year or 2 decades, is a standalone annual review the answer. That data set is too large, it's too long, it has little to no value. I'd argue worse than having no value, it's actually hurting your team. The way that I strongly recommend reviews work is, again, in the beginning period, up until that person is able to hit your minimum level of acceptable, you're meeting as often as they need. Once you get up to that point, move to a monthly meeting, then a quarterly meeting. Never drop below quarterly. A 3-month data set is large enough that you're not expending unnecessary time reviewing, but not so small that there's nothing to talk about. Those quarterly reviews then feed a big annual review. That will protect you from that recency bias that we talked about in the beginning, because you'll have notes from each quarter. And that final annual review will be Q4 and the accumulation of the first 3 quarters in that year. In that way, annual reviews have significant value. And once again, should be a discussion of that employee's performance as it relates to the goals you set together, to the development of their career, and to what's happening with them from a training perspective. Now, this leads me to what I asked you to stay around to the end for, and that's the EFG leadership framework. The EFG leadership framework is the secret sauce that makes you special. The EFG leadership framework is the red thread that ties all 12 key elements together, that ties the 3 phases of the destination employer methodology together. EFG leadership framework stands for E, engage, F, fulfill or fulfillment, G, grow or growth. Put it this way: if a person feels heard and valued, engaged, if their goals and their values are in alignment with the company so they enjoy and feel good about what they're doing, fulfilled, F, and G, are growing in their job skills and responsibilities, and ideally have a path beyond their current role in your organization, again, G, growth, then they're unlikely to leave your organization. They're incentivized to stay because they feel heard and valued, their goals are being met, their values are harmonious with the company they're working for, and they're growing in their career. For as long as those 3 things are in place, that employee is likely to stay. Is it 100%? Nothing is, but they're likely to stay. Done right, and in most circumstances, the piece of that 3-tiered system that will break is the G piece, the growth. Very often, that employee will grow to a point where they've become stagnant and you don't yet have the next role for them in your company. That is the time when most employees will leave if your organization is operating properly. And that's why exit interviews should never be punitive. When those people leave, they're not leaving because they failed you. They're leaving because they've grown as much as they can, and staying with you will cause them to stagnate. That's not a villain's move. So again, keep that in mind with your exit interviews. But the EFG leadership framework, which I talk constantly about on LinkedIn, is a big part of the book, is a big part of the Destination Employer Self-Paced program at destinationemployer.co. That's the special piece. Everything else we've talked about is important, but if you do nothing else, engage with your team so they feel heard and valued. Ensure that during the hiring process, that their goals and values align with what you need them to do inside of the role you're hiring them for and with your company. And focus for every minute they're with you on them growing their skills and responsibilities and trying as best you can to map their next role inside your org. If you do those 3 things, you're going to crush the retention odds in the United States and wherever you are. This episode wraps up our Destination Employer overview. Thank you very much, as always, for listening. It was exciting to get to talk about my book's methodology in so much detail. If you'd like to learn more, please, if you haven't already, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any episodes. Consider picking up the book on Amazon, or look at the Destination Employer self-paced program over at destinationemployer.co. If you ever want to talk, there's also links there to set up a call with me. I'd love to share more of these ideas with you. Thank you, as always, for your time. I know how valuable it is. Go out and build something awesome and continue to be awesome.